Okay, so this weekend my plan is to make a jig for the Dremel tool that I have. I'm going to be using the router option on it to cut the slots into my plywood board that will be the bedding for the hardwood strips that will go into the final product. Now to do this, I bought some pieces of aluminum here, and I'm going to set them up kind of like it's shown here, with the two L-beams kind of being used as a guide for this attachment here, and then the routing tool will stick down between the two of them, and it'll be guided straight by the L-beams basically. So I'm going to make a 30-inch long jig that will sit on top of the plywood, and I'll line it up with the marks that I already made on the plywood and just kind of guide the Dremel through it like that. So let's get to it. Okay, so a mistake that a lot of people make when they are cutting aluminum is that they go way too aggressive, way too quick. My methodology is to use a nail file to kind of mark out the line first, and that'll give you a good starting point for your saw. Then when you use your saw, you don't want a big bad blade, you want something with tiny little teeth to make little tiny grabs at the aluminum. And you're just going to kind of gently use it. It's hard to do one-handed, but gently cutting it. You're not pushing down, you're not trying to overzealously cut it, and let the blade do the work, and you'll get a nice clean cut out of it. So I have the two U-beams cut out for the base. These two are going to be fixed in place at about 3/8 of an inch apart. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out two more pieces and bolt them onto the end with the 3/8 inch gap in between them. And then once that is done, I'll get the routing tool out and we'll actually measure it out with the L-beams in kind of a loose fit to see where I can get those in and mark everything out for the drilling and tapping, and that will be the jig. So I have a hole here and in here. Now I'm going to tap them kind of together by lining them up and using my tapping tool here. I've already counterbored the top hole to accept the screws I have, but now just carefully turning the tap to cut that into there. And it's important that you do these together, because if you don't do these together, then your holes and your threads might not line up. So there it goes. Now we've threaded a hole. I'm going to back it out and then throw a screw in it just to test it out. Unfortunately, the metal is too thin to counterboard to that large head size, but that'll be okay. I'll be careful with my screw placement, that way it doesn't kind of ruin the project. But now the reason I'm threading it is because getting a nut up in there is not really possible, or at least not very easy. And given how lazy I am, this is a lot easier than trying to mess with that. So now that I have this end fixed, I can mark out the second hole on the second rail and really get a good idea of where that's going to fit and line up. So one problem I just realized I'm going to have is that I need to measure the spacing for these L-beams from the middle of this gap, but there's no thing to really measure from in the middle of the gap. So what I'm going to do is cover that with a piece of tape. And we're going to mark everything out on this piece of tape and drill it out from there So I'm going to drill the holes that are going to be kind of screwing in. If I can get this piece of tape flat and flush. There we go. So now I have something that I can actually mark on and get a good measurement on and write on, more importantly, because I want to be able to kind of measure out from the middle of this gap. I need to go about 1.18 inches out in order to have that spaced correctly. And that is difficult to do when, you got a giant gap. I'm going to keep saying gap. Cool, so now I've got the center line marked out on here. I'm going to actually mark out from the inner edge of the L-beam to that center line. I believe that should be 1.18 inches minus 0.62 inches, so 0.56 inches. So I need to mark out several spots on here from the middle out 0.56 inches, and I'll make another line on here, another line on here, and that will be where the inner edge of these L-beams go. And from there, I can start drilling holes. I'm going to probably put one here and one at the other end for the bolts, and that way the middle from one end to the other is actually clear, so that this can move freely through that gap. And once we're finished, we'll do kind of a test fit, and if I need to adjust anything, I'll adjust it then and get her going. Today the plan was to use this scrap piece of wood to show you what I've got going on here, but unfortunately, as it turns out, while the router does fit in nicely, the bit does not actually reach below the standoff there and touch the wood, which means that it's too tall. So in order to get a shorter setup here, what I'm planning on doing is taking these L-beams and putting them directly on the wood. Then I'll mill a slot using the router directly into the wood and use some of the spare pieces here to reinforce it and make it nice and strong. And that will be the new jig. I'll probably also cut off, the extra bits of wood there, but that'll help me when I get to the point of clamping it on. I'll have extra wood to help secure it. So I've routed out the groove in the middle here, and these are attached firmly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of these scrap pieces I had left over to kind of reinforce it a little bit and make sure it doesn't fluctuate and bend too much. And then I will chop off the excess on both sides to leave just a little bit. And then we'll actually go ahead and do a test run on the rest of the scrap over here. And that will be that. Okay, now demonstration time. I've got a piece of scrap wood here that we just cut off from the main thing. I'm going to adjust the height on my router so that it doesn't eat all the wood, but just enough for a slot. And then once we're done with that, we will check out the results. So let's get to it. And there we have it. We have a nice long groove cut into this piece of wood. The depth doesn't really matter. What really matters is how straight it is. And just eyeballing it, that looks really straight. So next step will be to actually do this on the real one. Here we have the final jig. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, and I can't wait to use it in the next episode. I'm going to go ahead and cut this one off because I know 30-minute episodes are not everyone's favorite. So stay tuned for the next one where we get jiggy with it. Yo, what'd you just say? It was just a joke.